So you've created a podcast and you don't know how to get more listeners. So you've had a podcast for a little while, probably 6, 8, 10 episodes, and the numbers just aren't going up. You're just not sure how to get more people to listen to the podcast. So you've been doing this about 6 to 8 months, and your podcast is growing a little bit, but you're not really hearing from your audience and you'd like more engagement. What do you do? This is what I'm going to talk about today as I hit my microphone because I get so fidgety when I have so many answers to these really basic but difficult questions in podcasting. So let's just dive in. Let's dive in. I've got a few different tips and tricks that I want to share with you in a resource that is going to blow your mind and change what you do. You still have to do the work, but I'll provide you with or I'll share with you, because it's not even my resource, to be quite honest with you. I'll share this with you at the end, and you can see that you've got a lot of work to do because promoting your podcast is as time consuming, if not more, than creating your podcast. Not a popular thing to say out loud, but a very truthful one for people that want to grow their podcasts. And I have grown my own podcast throughout the years. Hi, I'm Steph from Sane and Simple Podcasting, and I also had a long-running podcast called Geopats where I interviewed a bunch of different expats from around the world, expats and internationals from around the world about different things that grounded us in different places. There's book episodes, coffee episodes, um, internet episodes. There's so many different kinds of things. It was almost 8 years of my life, and it was absolutely one of the most amazing experiences, and it's what got me into providing services to others who wanted help with their podcasts. And I'll have links everywhere. You know where to find information on YouTube. So I trust you with that if you need help. But right now, I want to give you value, value, value. Say that really fast. Value. I want to give you information on what you can do. I approach podcast promotions as sharing, but I can't write it as sharing in the title because that isn't what most people search for. They search for the word promotions. It's the same exact thing. It's just the way I do it is approaching it as person to person, as person to group, as like an engagement exchange instead of just plopping information and running and hopefully somebody picks it up and pays attention to you. I need to be honest with you. People will pay attention to you when you pay attention to them. A podcast is a form of communication, folks. I know it doesn't feel like it because you put your audio out there and then it just goes into somebody's ears if they find it and like it and want to listen to it, but it's not. It actually is an exchange. And part of that exchange is your responsibility in paying attention to your listeners. What do they like and not like? What might they need to know? How can you respect their time? There's a lot of things you need to think about in terms of your listeners for your two-way conversation. And it's the same thing when you're promoting your podcast anywhere online. You want to engage with people. You want to give them value. This is how I approach podcast promotions / sharing. It's part of a conversation. It's not just dropping and running. If you would like to learn more information about dropping a link somewhere that's really important and might get you a lot of traction, probably not, but that's somewhere else. So I can't help you with that. I also don't do a lot of paid I have done some experiments with paid advertising, but generally speaking, I do relationship-based promotions with people when I do partnerships. So let's talk about some of these. Number one, maybe the most obvious, guesting on other podcasts. When you have a podcast that has a similar content to yours, you do not have a competitor, my friends. You have What do you have? You have a collaborator. Yeah, you do. Because they're doing something similar. You are always going to add your own flavor to your podcast. So even if you took the same script and read it as somebody else and read it out, which is very unlikely that you would do, you would still have a different take on it. You would still be a different person, right? So even if you had the same exact information, you would still create different content. So please don't worry. By sharing anything with another podcaster, in your content area. You're not losing anything, you're gaining a lot. So when you are on somebody else's podcast, you're talking to their audience and you're giving value, information, tips, stories, experience to their audience. And you're respecting their audience's time. And if they come on your podcast, then they're doing the same for that. But when you guest on another person's podcast, this is like the world's most amazing promotional tool, right? When you go on somebody else's podcast, they're already invested in that topic. I mean, how much more magical can you get from a marketing perspective? They're already in. They may not jive with you because podcasting is a very personality related medium. So they may or may not connect there, but they're already interested in the topic. That is way more of a click moment than any social media platform. And they already like podcasts. They're already listening to a podcast. They're already listening to a podcast about your topic. I mean, hi. Now, how do you find these people? Well, what are you listening to? If you're not listening to other content, other podcasts in your content area, start. Find ones you like. Find ones with someone you find interesting. You like their take on the topic. Probably not the exact same as what you're doing, but maybe if it is, that might be a really interesting conversation as well. I mean, there's so much you can do. Find someone you click with. Find someone you like, that you're curious about, and that you're interested in. Be interested, and you'll be interesting to their audience. Find someone you click with. I mean, come on. If you have a partnership of any variety, you're going to be in partnership with someone who you like. Find someone you like that's doing similar content in your content area. And then after you listen to a number of episodes and you get an idea of what their podcast is about, who their audience might be, blah, 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 follow them on the socials. Stalk them all over the place to find out what they're about. This takes a little while if you do it right. But we're going for depth of connection, not spreading your podcast in all these places that it never gets picked up. So do your research. Take your time. Take a few weeks. Once you figure out that you really do want to get to know this person and their audience, reach out to them and say hi. Introduce yourself, just like you would at a party or a group gathering or what have you, and say hi. I have a podcast too about this subject. I would really like to, and then suggest something. If they don't have interviews on their podcast, maybe you could invite them on yours. Or maybe you could suggest a special episode and don't make them do the work. If it's not a typical episode for them, if they don't generally have interviews or guests on, say, hey, I was wondering if you'd be interested in doing a bonus episode on this. I could add this information, this value to your listeners and help them, blah, blah, blah. Don't just say, I want to be on your podcast. Can I be honest with you? The RSS feeds that our audio is distributed on has our email addresses. And on a daily basis, many of us receive emails from random bots around the world saying, I want to sell you something, or I really love your podcast. They never mention the podcast name. They never mention any details or what episode they liked. These are not people, these are bots. What you want to do when you reach out to someone, preferably via email, is make sure they know you're not a bot. Be specific about what you've listened to of theirs, why you liked it, and why you think you would make a good collaborator for an episode on their podcast, an episode on your podcast, or both. Just be specific. It doesn't have to be long. It just has to be, friendly, kind, and giving value to their listeners. You don't just want to be on there to say, I want to grow my show, so I want to introduce myself to your listeners. That's not helpful for anybody. Well, it might be helpful for you, but it's not, because they'll probably just go, no thanks. So you really want to sell yourself as what you can bring to their audience, what you can give them, how you can help them. So guesting is a pretty awesome way to go. You can also guest on people's podcasts that aren't in your topic area, but you might want to do a little bit of analysis to figure out, will any of those people be interested in your podcast? For example, if you have a podcast on restaurants in a specific area, and there's a food podcast that you're interested in, or a cooking podcast, and they have some of their listener base would be in your area, might be in your area. I mean, you may not be able to find the exact information, but if there's any overlap that could happen, that could be a way to go. So reach out if you like it. If you like their podcast, you like what they're doing, reach out to them and suggest it and see what happens. Not everybody's going to say yes. Not everybody's going to reply to you. Chances are you'll probably, if the more specific you are, the more specific, friendly, and short you are, because long email is gross, the more response you're going to get back. So guest on other podcasts. Enjoy the community that you're creating with your voice around the world. Excuse me. Coffee moment. Can you dance for a second while I clear my throat? I had a cold a couple of weeks ago and it is just not leaving. Okay. Yay, coffee. Okay. So, the second thing I'd like to share with you is promo swaps. This is where you make you can either use your trailer if you have a trailer, or you can use a specific 1 minute segment that you've made to promote your podcast. You could have clips. You could just talk about your podcast and tell people, all the stuff, like what it's about, what they'll get from it, that kind of thing. Just a 1 minute clip. If you, again, have other podcasting folks who are somewhere in their podcast would have overlap with your content area, say, hey, I'd like to do a promo swap with you. Would you be interested? My podcast is about this, blah, blah, blah. I think your listeners would like it. Obviously, think of what their listeners would like. If it intersects with what you do, then you can suggest it. If it doesn't, then probably don't do that, because they'd be like, well, why would my listeners want your information? That doesn't make sense. I don't understand. And again, they probably won't even reply. What is a promo swap? Let me backtrack. In a lot of podcast apps, they'll have dynamic podcast platforms, podcast hosting platforms. They'll have this thing called dynamic ad insertion, where you can put a file, an audio file. For promo swaps, we'd go to about 1 minute is a good length. So you can put it before, in the middle, or at the end of your episode. Some podcast hosts actually let you pick the time anywhere in the episode. So it really depends on your podcast hosting platform. So do check with them. I host with Buzzsprout, and they have a beginning, middle, and end option for your dynamic ad insertion. So for promo swaps, what you would do is you would give your 1 minute clip to another podcaster, and they would put it somewhere in their episode. They would give you their clip and you'd put it in somewhere in your episode. Now you can negotiate with them. Do you want to play it for a certain amount of time, like every episode for a month, every episode for 3 months, or maybe just one episode where you swap the promos for one episode? Or do you want to just play it for a year? I don't know. I mean, do you want it at the beginning, middle, or end? Talk about these details, because you want it to be the same on both of the podcasts, for it to be fair for both of you, to have the similar exposure to the two audiences. Also, you probably want to reach out to folks who have a similar size audience as yours. You'll get more exposure, but you're more likely to get a yes from them if you're a similar size podcast. If you overreach and get someone who has a lot bigger audience, they may not think that it's advantageous enough for them to go through the process of adding your promos to their episode for their growth to do in their part of the swap. If you go too low, you might not get enough exposure if they don't have enough of an audience for you to put your promo in front of. So those are some things to consider. Similar to a promo swap, number 3 is a newsletter swap. If you have, and I really hope you do, a newsletter. Oh, and by the way, if you're in the chat room during this, please do say hi. I have a list of things I want to talk about, but I will absolutely answer questions and do all of that. So actually, I want to pull up the chat here so I can see it while I'm talking. There it is. There. Okay, so feel free to comment at any time, ask questions or comments, anything at all. I'd love to hear from you. Okay, so number 3 is newsletter swap. If you have a newsletter for your podcast, and I really, really hope you do, even if it's monthly, I hope you have one. You can do something similar to the promo swaps, but do it with other newsletters. I'm still on Substack. Try as I may to find a platform that has more functionality. I love the ease of use of Substack, and I can't seem to pry myself away from them. So I highly recommend them for ease of use. There's no formatting issue that stops me from producing an issue every time I want to. It's just so stinking easy. Um, and what you can do is you can actually find people on the same platform as you. Like for me, it would be on Substack, or you can find anybody who has a newsletter in your content area. Again, what newsletters do you subscribe to? If you don't subscribe to any podcast newsletters in your content area, hmm, that might be step one for you. Check them out because or not advertising, but doing newsletter swaps is one of the most underused podcasting strategies out there, because a lot of audio folks don't like to write in text, similar to people that like to write and read in text don't necessarily listen to a lot of audio. I know that's an extreme statement, but I'm making the generalization. So what you do when you cross mediums or when you use both mediums is you're reaching more people. So they may not necessarily go and listen to your audio, but they might check out your transcript, which even if you don't create one, now a lot of the platforms, the audio platforms, the distribution platforms, Apple, Spotify, and whatnot, they're creating them automatically with AI. So you could still have someone go and check out your episodes and read your episodes. So don't discount newsletters. Actually, put newsletters at the top of your list. Even if you don't do a newsletter for newsletter swap, you could do a newsletter swap. Like you could put your information about your podcast in someone's newsletter if you put their newsletter information into your audio. Like you don't have to do text for text swaps. You can really mix them. Mix and match them. Sort of like a buffet. Think of this sharing, community sharing within your content area as a buffet of connection and communication. There you go. I worked a food analogy, and that means we're at least halfway done. We are. Yeah. So that's number 3 is newsletters. Number 4. So as you can see, guesting, that's a community thing. You're engaging with someone who makes similar content. Promo swaps is also a community-based promotions tool, and newsletters, again, community based. So you can see the ones I'm picking out today are specifically connected to talking to others in your content area, in really focusing on the depth of the relationships that you have within the space, not so much just spreading your podcast anywhere and hoping someone who's interested in it will find it. This is sort of a difference between podcasting and other mediums as well. And this is a really good point to make right now, because podcasting is more intimate. It's more like geeky, deep down divey kind of thing than other mediums. I talked to someone this morning who mentioned that when they switched from YouTube to podcasts, that it felt like a more intimate place. They felt less showy, like on YouTube. And I'm exactly like this myself. When I'm making videos, I have to remind myself, be your podcast self. Be your podcast self. Because that's closer to me than when I get on video. When I get on video and I have to see the personality of my hair that day and how my lipstick's falling off and how I'm like moving my hands around too much, I get a little self-conscious and I act a little bit, whoa, kind of thing. Podcasting is much more of an intimate, connection-based medium than most anything else. It is really, really focused on, and I'm sorry if you're drinking coffee, please have a sip every time that I say the word connection today. Because I certainly will. So we're talking about the depth of connection, because those connections are what are really going to propel your podcast. People will say, oh, you're interested in history? You should really listen to April's Door Key podcast. They'll remember something about you because they know you better than they know other podcasters or other people in that content area. And they'll recommend you like it's just talking about their favorite coffee. How many times can I mention coffee? A lot, people, a lot. Okay, so far we've talked about guesting, I've talked about promo swaps, and I've talked about newsletters. quick reminder that, or not reminder, announcement that I'm going to be doing these half-hour YouTube lives every every Thursday starting April. Taking next week off, but every Thursday starting April. I'll probably do them as vertical lives in the future because those are getting a special nudge over on YouTube. But they will be here. They'll be on the front page of the YouTube channel. So if you like this, please do subscribe and hit that notifications button. That way you get a little nudge when something is scheduled and so you don't miss it. And you can be there in the chat room during the actual live itself. I'm rotating between a bunch of different topics. I've got workflow, ChatGPT for your marketing, podcast editing, promotions, and YouTube. Clearly today I'm talking about promotions, which I also like to call sharing. Okay, next. I want to share with you the resource that I got this from. I'm not going to show you because that looks really ugly in the video. It just doesn't do it justice. But I will have the link in the video below. This is Lauren Passel's 100 podcast marketing tips. It is from 2001 and it is still 1,000,000% relevant. I know 1,000,000% is not a real percentage and I don't care. They are really amazing tips. A lot of them are things that we talk about within the podcasting community, and some of them are super specific to what she does over at Tink Media with her team, and they do really good work. So I highly recommend taking a look at the 100 tips and picking one at a time that you can do. Try it out. If it works for you, keep doing it, maybe add on another one, so forth and so on. Please do not try to complete them all really quickly. There's a lot of tips, and some of them are quick, but some of them are not. Some of them take quite a bit of time. And one thing that I noticed in number 34, she has this beautiful piece of advice, similar to what I said a few minutes ago, but it's really important to repeat. When you're thinking of audiences, this is number 34, when you're thinking of audiences you want to target, don't just think about the kind of people you already have. Think about the kind of people you don't have but want. So again, thinking about the depth of the connections and thinking about who do I want? Yes, these are the people listening. And who else do I want listening? Who else do I want to attract with this project? You may get some people listening. You're always going to get people listening that you never thought would listen. And you don't need to not have them as listeners. That's fine. You can still listen, learn, refer you other people to you, that kind of thing. But you should have a target audience in mind because that will shape how you create the content, how long it is, the information, how you share the information, who you have on the podcast, if you have anyone on the podcast. Like so many of the factors on creating your podcast depend on who's going to be listening. And you get to make that choice. Whether they show up or not, that's not really in your control, but you can craft everything to get ready for them. And then if they come, yes. And if they don't, keep trying anyway, because eventually people find us. We put enough feelers out there. We put enough seeds out into the world. We do these things with guesting, promo swaps, newsletter swaps, combinations of them, and we do all of them. And they just work. And then people find us. And yeah, so knowing who you want to talk to affects everything that you do. And it also helps in sharing what you do because you know who you want to share. You know, it makes it easier to find other podcasts that have an audience that you'd really like to listen to yours. It makes it easier to find other podcasts to do promo swaps with. It makes it a lot easier to find newsletters that are sharing a specific kind of content that you know those readers would like your podcast. It just makes life a lot easier when you know who you're talking to, who you're creating content for, who you want to be in that two-way relationship with your podcast. It's not easy. I didn't say it was easy. I said it makes things easier once you figure it out, but it can be confusing, especially when you start to see the information that the podcast hosts give you about who is listening. It can cloud you and go, oh, maybe I should make this for them instead. Stick to what you think. You can change it if you want to, if that's who you want to talk to, but don't get distracted by the data. Focus on why you're creating it, who you're creating it for, and craft it with that in mind. My last thing is not so much connection based, but it is really important in all of these things that you're creating to share your podcast. Be sure to have a clear and simple call to action, CTA. Clear and simple. One CTA per share. Please do not overwhelm people with doing 5 things. At the end of your promo swap, don't say things like, go to Apple Podcasts and search for us. Go over to my YouTube channel and sign up for my newsletter. Stop. For one promo swap, say one way they can find you. Give them one way to find you. I know a lot of people want to share everything because they think that people can pick the one they want. That will overwhelm them, generally speaking. If you give them one way to do something, if they end up Googling your podcast name and they find the other ways, cool. If they search on YouTube going, well, I really prefer to find stuff on YouTube, and they find you, cool. If they, I don't know, just give them one and let them find you that way, and then they can search for other forms of your podcast that exist. But keep it simple. Ask them to do one thing, and then you could do different promo swaps with different CTAs and see which one works the best. See which one gets you the most engagement from folks who are listening to your podcast or consuming the other elements, either in newsletter form or in video form, that you're putting out into the world. Whew. That's a lot, right? I mean, it's only 4 things, really. It's guesting, promo swaps, newsletters, and CTAs with a focus on community and depth of engagement. But it's a lot. You could take these 4 and spend the rest of the year working on them, if not part of 2026. That's how much the time this can take and how much time it probably should take. Relationships aren't built overnight. And that's what you're building. Is relationships. You're building relationships with your voice, which I am losing mine. So I'm going to stop here and feel free to leave comments below. Let me know if you have any questions. I will be doing these every Thursday starting in April, probably in the vertical live format, which just means it's going to be more like this. Still on the same YouTube channel. Do subscribe and hit the notifications button. And by all means, please enjoy the connection process that goes with all 4 of these, because this thing that we do, this thing that we create, I'm not kidding when I say it changes lives. So enjoy that, because that's a pretty amazing thing. All right, I'm going to go. My voice is going. Thank you so much. Bye.